So we're really lucky to have these people here. Incredible backgrounds, and I think I'll have. Actually, let's spend a minute and a half. You can each do your own intros, and I really want the class to appreciate your applied experience. Some of you made mistakes. That's why you're so valuable. And yeah, we'll just kick it off. So my name's Jepson Taylor. You know who I am. I'll moderate, and yeah.
Hi guys, my name is Hayan Bhattacharya. I lead Gen AI practice within Capgemini. My background with AI, I think over the last 11 years it started with leading the go-to-market team at IBM Watson and launching cognitive practices on all 5 continents in different industries, and then moving on to be a partner at Deloitte and grow the AI practice. So I kind of started with Watson, went into looking at it more from, what are the other cloud hyperscalers doing. I joined Capgemini in January, so, focusing a little bit on NVIDIA, and the focus now is more around the software engineering space. I started my career, on the data side. I worked as a programmer analyst, and then I went on to work at Thomson Reuters and Reed Elsevier, launching commercial data products, mainly focused on banking and legal and healthcare domains. So it's been an interesting ride, just being able to advise a lot of companies at different stages, scaling up. And I think the last presenter talked a lot about the consumer space. I think my experience has been a little bit of, the manufacturing and consumer space as well.
Good to see you.
Okay. Yep.
I'm Jed. I'm the head of platform strategy at a company called Data-IQ, which is an AI and machine learning platform. I've been at the company for almost 9 years now, which is a long time for a startup world. When I joined, we were under 30 people. Now we're 1,400, so it's been a very interesting series of jobs that I've had. I started as a data scientist, then I built out our data scientist practice in the US, and then I built out our field engineering and support teams globally. So I've really seen kind of both the end user tech side as well as the infrastructure and administrative sides that are required to run machine learning or AI in big enterprises. Before I was at Data-IQ, I actually was in the public sector, or not public, yeah, I guess public sector. I was working in child welfare and foster care, doing analysis for that. We actually at one point tried to build the Tinder of foster children, which is less creepy than it sounds, but essentially it's a double-blind mechanism for foster parents and children to find each other. So yeah.
Excellent. My daughter-in-law is in the foster care system, or works in the foster care system
here in New York?
In New York City, yeah. She's not in the foster care system.
Yeah, I was at the Jewish Child Care Association.
Not that creepy. Yeah. So I'm Seth Dobrin. I'm currently the CEO of Quantum AI, which is an advisory firm focused on AI strategy, AI governance, and education for Fortune 1000 governments around the world. I also do a lot of advising work for private equity firms. I also have a $500 million venture fund focused on responsible AI, pre-seed through Series A. I've been in the AI space since the mid-90s. I'm a human geneticist by training, which may seem weird, but back in the mid-90s, machine learning made the leap from math and computer science into applications really in 2 fields, astrophysics and genetics and genomics. Everyone's heard of 23andMe, I'm sure, probably for good or better or worse. The technology underlying 23andMe, microarrays, I developed the core chip technology underneath, as well as how you interpret that. So that's the first place we applied machine learning, was how you interpret all those images and then make sense, as well as how you identify diseases based on the genetics that come out of that. From there, I went on to do startups and biotech startups and some academic research institutes. And then in 2006, I joined Monsanto, where I led what is seen as one of the first 2 transformations of a Fortune 500 company using AI. And so first I transformed the research, the product development part of the organization, leveraging molecular markers, so those chips I developed, as well as machine learning to predict what products were going to be the best, so you didn't have to grow them in the field. And then we generated about $5 billion worth of new value because we made the products that much better over 5 years. So they said, come do this for the rest of the business. Over the course of the next 5 years, we generated, we being my team, another $16 billion of value in the form of cost savings and new value. So in 2016, I left and became IBM's chief AI officer. I was responsible for AI across the whole company, everything from strategy to internal governance across the whole company. I also spent a lot of time working with IBM's customers, helping them do what we did at Monsanto. And then I decided to leave in 2022 to start Quantum and One Infinity, which is the venture fund.
Great. Hey, everybody. My name is Chen Wang. First, want to thank you all for being here on this lovely Friday night. And I've been doing anything else. So my job right now is working at a large language model provider called AI21 Labs. We develop large language models and also applications on top of large language models too, including a lot of agentic related product and platforms. You guys probably hearing agent or agentic workflow every day nowadays. I'll talk more about that later, but I started my career after I got my PhD from NYU right here. So being here brings me a lot of memories and being a little bit nostalgic. I started my career actually at IBM, working at the AI COE. I was leading a team developing internal machine learning solutions and for a couple of years, and then joined another AI software company called DataRobot. Doing very similar work as Dataiku actually, kind of automated machine learning at the time, pretty cool technology, and also doing a lot of customer-facing solution development and AI advisory work for different customers across different verticals. And then actually spent a lot of time focusing on the kind of alliances and partner ecosystem of technology in the AI space, and both for services company like Deloitte and Capgemini, and also for technology companies, the cloud providers and data platforms and all the sort of technology ecosystem you want to integrate with AI, embed AI technology, for different sort of model techniques you have, or these days large language models. You can't just have a large language model do everything for you. You need the large language model to be part of a proper tech stack to actually do something useful for you.
All right. I'll keep it brief since I'm last. But I'm Dan. So I work as the head of machine learning at Abnormal Security. We protect about 20% of the Fortune 500 from cyber attacks. We build all sorts of different AI-based systems to stop many, many millions of cyber attacks every day. Before Abnormal, I worked for about 5 years at Twitter, building some of the first applications of large language models and vector databases at Twitter. So my team ended up being the highest revenue generating team in Twitter's history. And the products we built, and unfortunately, I think a lot of the systems in the ads landscape at Twitter have been ripped out as the ad customer base has dropped so much. But we had something really good going for a little while there. Before that, I worked at a startup called TrueMotion, building sensor data analytics, and I actually got started in the machine learning space, like Seth, in the space of biology, building algorithms that could detect what's going on in somebody's brain during neurosurgery based on recordings. So my PhD from Oxford's in the applications of category theory to machine learning. So exploring machine learning from more of a theoretical math perspective and looking at some alternative formulations of some of the core algorithms. I'm excited to be talking to you all today.
Great. So there's something interesting about this panel. They're very technical. I imagine some of you are technophiles. You love the technology, but because of your career journeys, you've figured out how to talk to normal people, not just normal people, executives. So as you think about this next question, what advice do you have to technical groups and teams when you do have to talk to executives? What are some of the principles that you've learned, or some of the mistakes you've made that's also interesting to kind of take you to where you are now? You all don't have to answer this question because we do have a large panel, but if some of you feel compelled to share some of this, any volunteers?
Leave the notebooks at home.
Leave the notebooks at home?
Leave the Jupyter notebooks at home.
Leave the Jupyter notebooks at home. Okay, so that doesn't count for a production solution. Anyone else? What advice?
Yeah, the biggest thing is what you present to executives is different than what you present to the people who are working on the system. I would just said exactly what Seth said in another way, is if you needed, the executive summary needs to be its own separate thing that reformulates the language in the way that specifically the particular executive that you're presenting to, ideally, but certainly you have to know your audience.
Yeah.
Your audience, the executive audience, is unlikely to be the same as whoever was contributing to putting together the initial analyses or conclusions or documentation.
So Dan, you make me think, how do you bridge that knowledge gap? Because sometimes there's the temptation to pull the executive over to your side, maybe educate them a little bit more than you should. So what's the appropriate level of education for an executive?
It depends on what type of decision they're trying to make. There's a reason why you're talking to the executive. There's a decision that is being made, or a context, that critical context that's being shared that's ultimately in service of some key decision. You have to understand what are the core important pieces of technical information that are necessary in order for that decision to be made effectively, and not bring in extra things that aren't required.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I teach a class over at Baruch, which is it's a city university over down the street from here in the CIS department, and I spend 3 hours on this topic. And it's really kind of gets to the core of, when you're talking to an executive, it's kind of like when you build, it's exactly like when you're building a strategy. What is the business problem that you're talking to the executive about? And how did you get to addressing that business problem? And that's all you need to talk about. You don't need to talk about any of the technical stuff. You need to be able to discuss what the technical stuff is if the executive asks in a non-condescending way, and just keep going down until she starts asking questions, and then just answer her questions, and that's it. But start with the business problem, and that's it, and explain how you got the answer.
I think to build on that, I feel like a lot of the executive conversations are either about like an education or an enablement about the overall AI space trends. The second category is where folks want to understand often like, okay, what is the application areas? What's the point of view that you see in my industry, and how am I doing benchmarking? So there's usually a board level kind of push to get some clarity in terms of what is the AI strategy. And then I think the third set, I was talking to a CEO of a large technology like manufacturing company where his point of view was that, look, like, I understand that we've been doing a lot of POCs and innovation, but I feel like we're not doing enough. So can you show me across the value chain, how do you systematically look at this from a product creation standpoint, but also from an internal efficiency? There's a lot of buzz around Copilot and how much productivity it's doing. Like, help me make it measurable, but also put the guardrails and governance. And a lot of those conversations, like tools like Data IQ come in, and others are really trying to kind of future-proof and think, okay, do I need GPU computing capacity right now? So I think there are some CEOs, CMOs who want to kind of understand also the technology landscape that they should be building, because there's just so much out there and the choices are sometimes overwhelming.
Yeah. Jen?
Yeah, without to, I think totally agree with everyone is commenting on, and maybe just add one more small piece of sort of point. I do think it's sort of talking to anyone is actually similar. Is human tendency is to focus on yourself, right, instead of your audience, instead of who you talk to. I think the same thing happens, when you talk to AI executives or for a solution maybe you're developing really amazing, you're excited about on using fancy tools you've done, and then you tend to as a sort of from a solution developer perspective or from a technology provider perspective, you tend to highlight how amazing your technology is and how amazing your solution, how smart you are, and all of that. And that's definitely not what the sort of audience want to hear in most cases. They want to hear, they don't care about technology itself in many cases. They care about the results, they care about user experiences, they care about what this really means for me and for my business. So I think a lot of times kind of maybe shift the perspective from yourself to the audience and really sort of try to think really hard about what they might want to hear and what they really care about, and how can we really what we do really helps everyone else's life easier, better, and really getting value from the tool and solution rather than sort of talks about how amazing your technology is.
Yeah, well, sometimes less is more. If you overshare or talk about confidence or other technical terms, it can actually do the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
one thing I like to preemptively do prior, like I know I'm going into a meeting with an executive, I try to research their past, LinkedIn profile, obviously, talk to people who know them, specifically to understand what their risk profile is. So are they risk takers? Are they more concerned about risk or more concerned about return? And I want to really tailor my message. If I know this person is, very much not a risk taker, I don't want to go in and be like, we're going to change everything with you. And they're going to be scared of that. Whereas if they are a risk taker, yeah, we want to help them see some brand new future that really shifts the tone of the conversation for sure.
Yeah, I think if you look at the large life science companies, there are like 3 or 4 CEOs of the top 10 who are very systematic in terms of communicating their desire to be, a leader in terms of AI, not just for their company, but also kind of in the industry. And I absolutely think that's an observation. I sometimes find like, a lot of the conversations now are like, okay, can you build me something like a ChatGPT? 11 years ago, I remember, being at a credit card company where it was a pretty senior person. He's like, I just want you to Watsonify it. I'm like, oh, you mean apply natural language processing, have a sentiment analysis, and then figure out like what is the, conversation that you want with your customers or intermediaries. So, sometimes it works when you want to explain the technology, and other times it's just keeping it simple. Like the previous speaker was talking about, the appeal of Tinder is not the AI, it's more the simplicity of the experience.
I
Right?
generated over $20 billion of value at Monsanto without ever talking about technology. Not once did I ever talk about technology.
Yeah. So this next question, I think this is going to be a difficult question, and you're talking to a class who sat through an entire day of ramping on data science, technology, AI, delivering value to executives, and you can imagine they have a lot of the common sense that we typically share on stage probably will not be that profound right now. Mm-hmm. And so as each of you think about your own life experience, what is a piece of advice that you think would be helpful to this audience? And try to think of something that is not, that has not been mentioned today.
I think,
No, go ahead.
this is something that I was covering like earlier this week. It's like a lot of clients are trying to do AI and they're struggling having the data work with that environment. So I think there's a lot of discussions around how do you have a flexible data environment which is able to support BI workloads. And then you also have like AI workloads which are in 2 dimensions. One is more around the virtual assistant space. There's a whole lot going on there. I think Mustafa Suleiman, was sharing some of the new Copilot like interactive experiences. So we're just like I think there's going to be a lot more embedded experiences. So that is something that you have to think about. That how do you support that? It's not just text or analyzing a voice file. It is more the video and the real-time experience. So I think it's just being able to think of it that you can develop a AI solution, but then what is the total cost of ownership that you need to plan for and just be mindful of it. And things like, should you build your own LLM, or should you be using an open source, or should you be just using like microservices? I think a lot of those are factors that drive the data strategy as well.
Yeah, I like that, the total cost of ownership. Sometimes you just focus on getting something done. You don't think about it. What about you, Dan? Do you have something profound or some wisdom you can share?
Yeah, so I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say 2 things. So the first one is, don't focus on the technology for the purpose of the technology. Understand the technology and then focus on the business problem. It's, bringing AI to an area or bringing AI to a problem is a great way to attract investment. It is a great way to win political battles at a company. It is not a good way to actually drive value for shareholders, for customers, for the business. But because it's a good way to do those 2 things, plenty of people will do it very successfully for all sorts of different reasons, but it won't actually, what's important is solving problems. And solving problems with technology requires understanding what the technology can and can't do, and what's the right way to deploy it, and what's changing, and what's possible, and who's good at it, and how to align people who are good at it to it, and all of these different things. But it's ultimately about what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And then taking a complete 180 and making a different statement. Programming is the space that's going to change the most. of all the different things, and that has changed over the last. The world of machine learning and AI has been expanding and growing and changing for many different years. There have been many different cohorts. If you ask what's changed in the last 2 or 3 years, it's programming. That's really where there's, and it's not just programming itself, but all the things that are programming adjacent. If you have, in cybersecurity, I see a lot of people writing detection rules. It's a very common thing. You write rules that scan your logs and identify if there's something that's malicious, matching certain criteria. Good large language models can generate these rules very effectively. So this particular kind of knowledge work that looks and smells like programming has been completely, dramatically, irrevocably changed, and it's going to be turned up on its head in a way that actually none of the other things that people have predicted, not writing or marketing or sales, all of those, there's new tools and new nice things, but programming's been completely turned upside down.
Yeah, completely agree. Jen?
Who here has read situational awareness? Read situational awareness. It's a white paper. You can look it up online. It was published summer of this year by a guy who was previously at OpenAI. And I don't know if he's right, but the future he paints is worth everybody understanding as a possibility. It's a real deal. His general thesis is that potentially, like basically all you need to get AGI, you don't need an LLM to become like globally good at everything. It just needs to become basically a PhD level researcher in AI. And then it can bootstrap itself into figuring everything else out. And he's like, that's probably 3 years out, which is intense, if he's right. He might not be, but it's intense. Yeah, strong recommendation to read that.
Depends on your definition of AGI, though,
Right.
which there's a big debate about that.
Yeah.
So, yes, I jumped in, I guess. I think, I think the big thing is don't listen to the hype. Despite what you hear out there, bigger is not necessarily better. In fact, I would argue that in most cases, bigger is not better. 99% of the cases, even if you need a language model, you probably don't need an LLM, you probably need a small model. In most cases, if you build a small model for a specific task or a specific industry or specific business or specific part of your business, it will outperform a large language model on that task or that part of your business. It will cost less, it will use less energy, it will be more efficient, it will hallucinate less. And so bigger is not better. Don't go into the hype, despite what you hear in the news. Yes, these big models are cool. Yes, they're awesome. No, they don't reason. Ask it a logic problem. It will not be able to solve it. Ask O1 a logic problem. It can't solve basic logic problems. They can't reason.
Right.
Yeah, maybe I think I'll add one more thing. Give sort of just on the, especially on the enterprise space, when we think about how can we bring AI into enterprise and really add value to customer. Besides the technology piece, there is definitely a culture sort of piece to it too, where sometimes we talk about AI literacy or AI maturity, however you want to call it, but it's sort of a culture of people sort of tend to try things, the new tools, data platforms, AI tools, and just sort of cultivating a culture that is open-minded to new technology and to be willing to try something new, right? Very often, AI solution developed internally with in enterprise, and everything seemed to be going well, and by the end of the day, the end user just not adopting it. There are many reasons to it, and sort of I think a big piece of it is sort of AI maturity and AI literacy in the organization and the culture of it. Also, sometimes just feel like every day there's a lot of new technology and new things are coming out every day. It's hard to keep up, and it kind of feel like maybe it's 1995 or the internet, right? I think what's coming to us in the next decade, probably no one can predict, and it's going to be quite a drastic change, disruption by AI, and keeping open mind and just look out for what's new and what's next, and really sort of be ready to adopt it. That's something I think quite important for enterprise, especially.
Yeah. I think we'll spend another 10 minutes and open up to the audience, and we'll do lightning round. And so lightning round, if you feel compelled to answer the question, let's keep it quick, 30 seconds. And yeah, thanks, Dan. So does anyone have any questions? There's a ton of experience up here. Some of these people are much further along on deploying LLMs in production. Yeah.
A little bit of a parlay on Dan's comment, but growth that you described, has your talent acquisition and hiring strategy changed fairly drastically in, say, the last couple of years as to where you were before? in light of maybe some of the co-pilot capabilities and just the evolution that you're seeing in the market?
Yeah.
Are you guys changing the way that you're thinking about building out your teams?
Certainly our clients are. Finally, Gen AI has finally made things to the point where non-technical people legitimately feel that they should be using these technologies in their day-to-day work. And that's really exploded the way we've had to think about, oh, okay, now I'm trying to help a business person use this tool that we've built versus I'm trying to help a PhD in data science use this tool. Now I'm talking to 1,000 analysts versus 10 super good data scientists. And I think that's great. I think that's a wonderful evolution. But yeah, a lot of what's had to change is the way we train our clients and the personas that we need to talk to.
Extending on that a little bit too, on your question actually, is I was with a professor at MIT who she studies the future of work, and they're trying to figure out what future jobs are, because we know jobs are going to go away and new jobs are going to emerge, and no one has any clue what the future jobs are, right? The one thing that GPT-01 did do was it's the beginning of automating prompt engineering. So what we've seen is the beginning of the death of the first generative AI job. Prompt engineering as a job is going away, right? So we just saw the shortest career ever in human existence. I mean, you'll still need prompt engineers, but you're not going to be paying $350,000 a year
Did anyone
for them
do that?
anymore. Anthropic was hiring them for $350,000 a year. So no one has any idea what the jobs of the future are. So that's kind of building on your question.
I had a question on the talent, but since he asked, I'll change the question. Seth, you talked about hallucination. Chen, you work with LLMs. As we think about agentic architecture, people talk about planning and reasoning getting better. Will hardware and pure neural approach get us there from a planning and reasoning perspective in your mind?
That's a great question. So I'll share a little bit from my experience about, of course, there's a lot sort of things I don't know, and things people are constantly developing in the field every day. I think, so especially if we go from a single call to LLM to a actual Gen AI solution or agentic solution where you're going to be interacting with many different components and many different LLMs potentially multiple times in different iterative ways or sequential ways, however you want to do it, any sort of small percentage of error will compound. Small percentage of hallucination is going to become a bigger problem as you making many calls to LLM for your single question or single point of issue you want to solve. So there's a lot of techniques. There are techniques to be involved, and having the LLMs to reflect on itself, or having different LLMs to check the answer for you, and also building sort of other checks and balances in your system. I think right now we're thinking about this. We think LLM is sort of the centerpiece of the puzzle, where it is sort of doing the planning, deciding which tools to call, for example, or sort of making essential decisions. But it may not be that way forever, right? There could be systems where LLMs are only sort of playing that assistant role, where you still have, you build a lot of rule-based systems or empirical model around it, and then have LLM to really help you handle edge cases. That could be the case. So I think really sort of having a system where human can trust. By the end of the day, it's sort of a trust issue where can you trust the decision or outcome coming from this Gen AI system or AI system in general? And if you can't, then human still need to be involved in the loop. And in many cases, that's actually sort of really sort of not aligning with the sort of cost-cutting value proposition. So I think there's quite a bit of there's the right use cases and there may be wrong use cases for it. So there are use cases can tolerate certain amount of hallucination, and also there are techniques that can help you reduce the hallucination impact from the LLM to your entire solution. And also LLM may not be going to be the sort of the quarterback for every single thing happening in that solution. I think there are many things happening there. Yeah, so
Can I jump in real quick?
Please do.
So I think one of the fundamental issues is that generative AI and language models, particularly, are technology called foundation model, which are pre-trained deep learning models. The current technology that everyone's building on today is something called the transformer architecture. That architecture will always hallucinate. And one of the core issues is that all of the big companies are hung up on the transformer architecture. And so you will never get rid of the hallucination problem. Now, we're seeing other companies start moving towards more deterministic models or technologies, things like neurosymbolic AI or neuromorphic computing and things like that. Those technologies do not hallucinate as a default. And so as we move away from this transformer architecture into these other technologies, you will start seeing generative AI technologies that have less of a hallucination problem. Until we make that leap, if anyone ever comes in and tells you their model does not hallucinate, they're lying or they don't know what they're talking about. End of the conversation. You agree with that?
I totally agree. Yeah.
And so that's the short answer. They will always hallucinate, the current technology.
And also just kind of add on what Seth mentioned, we have to move beyond the current transformer-focused model, and also we have to move beyond from a single model to a AI system.
Yeah.
And I'd actually like to hear from all four of you. If you were sending a kid to college in the next couple of years, what would you tell them to major in, or what would you tell them not to major in?
I would say that it's probably like bioinformatics. Like I feel there's a tremendous opportunity for how personalized medicine will change. I think right now there's a lot of focus on taking the sensor data that you can measure from an external standpoint, whether it's like glucose monitoring or Fitbits or rings and so forth. But I think that that's a area there will be continued demand from a scientific kind of like research standpoint.
Great question.
I'd say, I think math. Yeah. Like, as all of kind of the technical engineering parts of this stuff start to get abstracted, like we're always, folks are already saying programming is the first thing that's changed. Like, underlying thinking hard about problems is still going to be there, I hope, and math is a great way to make sure you can do that.
Great. I teach at two universities. I teach master's program at two different universities. I have a PhD. I told both my kids, don't go to university. Universities don't teach you how to think anymore. They teach you how to memorize things. I told them to go to work, figure out what you love, and if you need to go back to college to have the life you need, go back to college to have the life you need. One of my sons makes almost $200,000 a year. He told me he was going back to college. I'm like, you've had a job for 4 years. You can get a job anywhere else you want. He was a software developer. He's learning all this stuff all the time. Why are you going back to college? Do you think I want you to? And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, I don't want you to. Are you going back to college? He's like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, why are you doing it? And so he's not going back to college anymore now. He doesn't need to go to college. He can learn stuff. He has a job. He can make money. I mean, he's making almost $200,000 a year. Why does he need to go to college? And he's gotten 2 jobs since then. I think college is worthless at this point. Until we change college, learn how to learn. That's what's important. Yes. We need to change our hiring practices. We need to change college.
You realize you are done by you, right?
I do teach at NYU, yes.
What do you think, Jen?
That's an awesome question. I almost think it every day because I have a 5-year and an 8-year kid, and I really think about, hey, what should I teach them now? I mean, also, really still a question. Every day, like, actually prepare them to sort of have a fulfilling life in the future. I'm not sure, what that life they want or what that sort of ideal life might be, but sort of just, be able to, have them realize their full potential and enjoy their life and have a fulfilling life, from their own perspective.
I think the other question is, which are the areas that you don't want to go into, right?
Right.
I think legal, for me, is one of those things where I think about the industry, that if someone's coming out of law school and their motivation is very low to go and work for a large law firm and spend 16 years trying to get to a partner, if that's considered the ideal journey for some.
Consulting's a horrible field to go into these days, too.
I agree. I mean, I think from most consulting firms, they are looking at a huge shift, because the challenge with both these, and I'm not talking about just my personal experience, but everyone I talk to, it's like, it is very difficult to motivate someone coming out of college to have that patience and adherence, just given, that a lot of the folks have gone through COVID, right? You're like living in a virtual world, so you don't really appreciate a lot of those things when you kind of go through it, right? Like,
well, those jobs are both going to get automated significantly those are going to both get impacted significantly by
that's
AI.
What we do.
Legal and consulting are going to get dramatically impacted by AI as much as programming is.
Yeah, you're talking about 01 not being able to solve logic problems, but it did I think it scored a perfect score on the LSAT and passed
That's
the New
just
York bar.
That's just memorization, though.
Yeah,
That's
so-
pure memorization.
And the use of AI is
Yeah.
inversely proportional to the originality of the problem.
See, I feel a little bit differently about college in the sense that if you think about the last experience, that the dating apps are now kind of going down because people want that interpersonal experience. For me, I think a lot of motivation for folks to actually go and spend a fortune is really, how do you cultivate yourself as a person and develop these personalities? Like, yes, can you go and talk to AI and learn how to be a better salesperson, or get a virtual assistant to tell you how you should handle a customer call? Yes. But it's that, I think that is the the $1 million question, that you don't need college, but if you ask anyone, okay, what were your memories of college or business school, whatever you did, it's it's not that classroom thing, it's more the networks that they've built and how do you grow from that.
Yeah, as someone who came from a low socioeconomic background, being able to say I went to college was a huge deal because I didn't have any network, right? Like, first generation college student, and who am I going to get introduced to get a job out of high school? Like, nobody. So I do think college is obviously still useful as a stepping stone and as a resume builder, and I went to Arizona State and I had a great time. No kidding.
I did too. And I was also a first-generation college student.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
no one
yeah.
in my family went to college, and I went to Arizona State.
Go
Probably
Devils.
many years before you.
But I still think, if for someone who still thinks going to college, and I think, if we think about economic return, I would still think computer science probably still the most economic, high return.
I would be very critical of, you'd want to look into the university and understand if they are adopting generative techniques, because it'd be a nightmare if your student or your kid went to a university that wasn't. So what do you think are the competencies for the future of work, specifically within computer science? So what are the core measures of competency that you'd think about if you were looking at someone who was being interviewed for a computer science position? What do you want to see?
I'm biased
Oh.
because I'm ecosystem and infrastructure by a lot of what I do. But people who understand how these dozens of tools fit together, and people who can build a stack that's going to be successful at scale at an enterprise level, that's a really still quite difficult and very critical skill, especially as new AI companies and new technologies are being rolled out like every couple months. Understanding, okay, this is my database layer, this is my services layer, this is my application layer, this is how we're all going to scale it all out, this is how we're going to make sure we can keep up on all our deployments, everything like that. Like, yeah, sort of like the architecture side of things is hard and getting more complicated every day.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, sort of one practical thing is, I think I would tend to think people who leverage the new tools, the different sort of copilots, there's all integrated sort of copilot tools, with different IDEs these days. I think, if someone demonstrating that they are using this sort of new tools, copilots efficiently, effectively, helping them to become more efficient, demonstrates really important quality where they are, really adapting the new ways of helping them to become more efficient, sort of showing the open-mindedness and sort of show them they could be more future-proof in that way if they show this sort of quality.
Yeah. Adaptability.
Adaptability, yeah.
Anyone else on this question, or we can go on to the next?
Creativity, safety, security, and laziness.
Yeah.
I want people who are going to
Laziness is
use
good.
whatever's at their disposal, Google, all the tools, things like that.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's, sometimes you can talk to someone and figure out like their technical background, and I think this goes to your question. It's really, how do you figure out their intellectual curiosity? Because what Jeb's talking about, that you can't just do in a 40-hour space, right? So I think if you're thinking of it from a enterprise or corporate standpoint, like, okay, what kind of resources do I want to recruit? I think a lot of the recent innovation in HR tech has been to really kind of parse through that, because the resume can tell so much, but then some of the behavioral stuff that we were hearing before, just in terms of how someone communicates, often you have 4 people interviewing someone and they're filling out a survey, but you don't know what the quality of that interview was. So if there are ways to kind of capture those elements of how the person can actually talk and communicate, because that's a huge part of it, especially if you're not just like writing rules and not interacting with people, but you have different teams globally. That's, I think, a big factor which I look for usually.
I think corporations do have an obligation to give their teams time to learn at work now too, because they're expecting everyone to stay up to date, everyone to know all this stuff. I think there's an obligation for corporations to provide learning, access to learning, time and materials at work, and not expect people to do this on their own time. And I think many companies say they do, but they don't.
Yeah. So I think.
I'll slip in this one question.
Yeah.
If you think about post-transformer eras, and you just look at the last 2-3 years, and then you use that to project for the next 10 to 15 years, what would it do for service industry and jobs?
Service industry, like
Well, intellectual, like
bartending?
Yeah, like you consult from consulting to companies that have intellectual usage.
I think the biggest so start with the challenge. The biggest challenge is you're going to see all the entry-level layers get cannibalized. And so we're already starting to see that, right? And so now there's going to be this time where you're getting all this cannibalization of all this entry level, so now you have no people to fill the ranks. And so how do you kind of backfill all of the people? And so there's going to be an impact. There's going to be a crisis of, okay, now what do we do? And I think that's going to come shorter. In terms of what does the workforce look like, is that what you're asking? I mean, I think, so Jamie Dimon said, I think he said in 5 years, JPMC has 65,000 software developers today. I think he said in 5 years he wants to have 30,000. So he expects to cut his developer workforce in half in 5 years or less. I think that's what we can expect across the board, and they're getting augmented. So augmentation doesn't mean no job loss. I think when we say we're augmenting jobs, we kid ourselves and say there's no job loss. I think when we say there's going to be more jobs in 10 years, there will be more jobs in 10 years, but between now and 10 years, jobs are going to go away. What do we do with those people? I'm getting off your topic a little bit here. And the big difference between this revolution and previous industrial revolution is previous industrial revolutions took place over 3 to 5 generations. So we were not transforming within a workforce, within a generation. So while people were in the workforce. I mean, I'm 55. This is going to happen while I'm in the workforce, right? People my age. So how do we reskill and upskill those people so they can still participate in the workforce if their job's going away? Yes, there's going to be new jobs, but jobs are going to go away. How do we change those people so they can still participate? There's $17 trillion of value that we're going to realize from AI and Gen AI, according to McKinsey, in GDP. The only way we realize that GDP if there's people working to buy our products and our services. How do we keep all those people working? That's the challenge. I don't care what the work, honestly, I don't care what consulting looks like. I don't care what programming looks like. I care about how do we make those 50% of the developers that are going to lose their jobs, how do we make them productive? And how do we transform them into those jobs that we don't even know what they are yet?
I mean,
this is insane.
Loads of journalists lose their jobs. But I think it's very hard to quantify it. I would almost argue there's probably more people making a living with writing as part of their job now than there were in newsrooms, right? Because we lose visible jobs. Like you lose the jobs at JP Morgan. But take YouTube. What happens when it's really easy to code or thereabouts, right? And we've seen this with content. A shitload of people make a shitload more content, right? Like
Are they making
Instagram.
as much money? Are they participating as much in the economy?
Well, but we just can't capture. We don't know, right? Like there's millions of people making their living in and around Instagram and YouTube, right? It's really hard. But literally no one knows, basically, right? Because they're not making it. They're not giving a paycheck from YouTube, right? They're making money from sponsorship deals. So I would and my view on it, which again, I'm a layperson, so I'm asking you guys, I'd love your reflection. My view on it is even if coding gets 95% automated, if you also expand the market 1,000 times, which I don't think is conservative, because look at what's happened with content. Now everyone has a camera in their pocket, everyone posts on social media. If me as a layperson go, I kind of want something at the moment, I'm just not going to build that because I'm not a developer. Whereas if I can get it an MVP out there, And then if it starts making money or it starts being really interesting, then I might turn to a developer and say, well, I need you now to do the security, like, and now need you to make sure it's robust.
So let me give you the analogy. We have all these phones in our pockets now, right?
Yeah.
Kodak doesn't exist. All those people that were building non-digital phones, they don't have a job. Yes, we have people building digital phones. Yes, we have people using digital phones. All those people that were building analog phones at Kodak, they didn't have a job. And so I think, kind of look at it that way, right? Manufacturing moved out of the US to other parts of the world.
Yeah.
We have parts of the rural US that are completely, there's no jobs. They have to move to get jobs. People are not mobile.
I think just building on that and your point of looking
We're
at
not
a
really
content
answering your
creator
question, I'm
economy, if you look at Mad Men and the whole ad agency world, like which is synonymous with New York, every ad agency has like a 40% cannibalization because of the fact that their clients are saying, I don't need an agency to roll out something in 100 languages. I can, use whatever creation tools. To your question, in the next 10 years, I think 3 industries like autonomous cars, right? Like Uber, they have the platform right now. It's more the legal space, like how that's going to evolve. I see a lot of clients just trying to eliminate anything which is transactional. So that builds on the Jamie Dimon kind of thinking that if you look at like I started my career in financial services, and if I look at the last 20 years across banking, like you look at like the payments evolution, like the future is very clear. Like you're not going to have like, banks started ATMs and walk-in tellers because they realized from NPS scores that pure digital relationships are reducing the loyalty with someone felt Apple was a better thing. The third space I would say is that if you think about how we visit a general physician, many of us will go for an annual checkup or something. A lot of people would say, oh, you go and become a doctor, that's a safe profession stuff. Now people are going to question because it's like the time to get there. I agree with Seth, like is it really worth going for medical school for 10, 12 years on a ROI basis? Maybe, maybe not. Malpractice, and then the thing that everyone comes in now with a point of view that they've formed by going and researching their diagnosis and symptoms. So, it's kind of like the role of the teacher and professor has evolved, how now they're getting rated, right? So a lot of how you would teach has evolved, and also after COVID, everything has to be virtual and so forth. So I would say in the next 10 years, those are some of the areas that I definitely think, at least in Americas, it will impact our society because who's going to live in the cities? Why do you need this kind of infrastructure? So there are some broader ramifications where I think you're going to see it, in the GDP, the growth, how is wealth accumulated? I think those are the broader things that I see like in the next decade.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we get to food. So the final question, and we can continue the conversation over food. What keeps you up at night? And this is typically, people think of this negatively, but it can also be positive as well. So think about that for a second. What keeps you up at night? What's your mind racing about regarding AI these days?
I could start.
Okay.
So if we're thinking about how new models are going to be developed, there's kind of like 3 levers there. So I guess like new ideas. So somebody coming out with a new paper or somebody coming out with a new mechanism for building language models or other types of models. More compute, so faster GPUs, more GPUs, being able to train on larger models. And then finally, more data. And the data problem is pretty scary. I think that's maybe the strongest limiter because we've already ingested the entire internet. And going forward, the internet is going to be poisoned by these LLMs generating content. And the the country that happens to have way, way, way more data than anybody else due to their social surveillance programs is China. And so China has a huge, in some ways, they may not have the idea advantage, but they definitely have the data advantage if we're thinking about any type of who's going to come out ahead in 30 years. Is it going to be, the Western world, or is it going to be China? So that keeps me up a little bit.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think for me, it's just that a lot of the AI is based on training data, which is the sum of the last 10, 20, 30 years of transactions, right? So from an ethical standpoint, there's only so much you can do if, all the underlying kind of trained algorithms. So I think that that's something which I always reflect on, that, okay, we are kind of perpetuating some of the biases, whether it's in lending decisions or, content. So that's what I think sometimes just, it's on the back of my mind that, yes, you have a trustworthy principle, but how much of that is going to be, supported by, nation states and the regulations around it?
Okay.
So I've a couple things. So one is something that I've been talking about for about 3 or 4 years now, is this concept of technological colonialism, since these foundation models, which are pre-trained deep learning models, became popular. All these models are trained like on basically the whole of the internet. And they're trained primarily by white dudes in California and Chinese dudes in Beijing. Now, if you want to participate in this new economy, you have to use these models that are trained on data from the Western internet or the Chinese internet, built by white dudes in San Francisco or Chinese dudes in Beijing, knowing that most of the global South don't have data on the internet. And so you're getting cultural perspectives from these two parts of the world being inflicted on the rest of the world. And so that's problem number one. Problem number two is this whole concept of, and I don't know what to do about that. Well, there's things you can do about that, but that's a really, really hard problem. Problem number two is there's a whole lot of AI being developed that they're really not considering the implications. Even, Dinesh was talking about that one application that can read your emotions. Yes, they only sell it if they're going to do something good. It shouldn't have been developed. I never would have funded something like that. I would have told them, stop, I'm done, I don't want to see this. Things like that shouldn't get funded. End of conversation in my mind, because there's really, really bad things that you can do with it, or if they do get funded, they should go into national security agencies, because they need those. I don't like it, they need those to keep us safe. And so, we need to make sure that AI is developed responsibly, safely, ethically with guardrails, and there's even well-defined guardrails set up by OECD where you can clearly define what those are. And that's actually why we set up this fund that I have. It's all based around funding responsible AI projects, because I've been in this for 20 some odd years now, and this is how I want to leave my legacy, is by making sure that we can have AI that is implemented responsibly, because it's got a tremendous amount of value if it's done right.
Yeah. Well, I really like that you pointed that out, because that technology that was reviewed was exciting, but when you think about the false positive, it could be devastating. So Chen, you want to?
I'd love to maybe share two quick things. First thing is, I think, connects to what everyone's saying. There's gonna be explosion of, like, another level of explosion of content being generated over the internet with AI. So we're already overloaded with information at this day and age, and I think sort of how do we maintain a balance and the same mind going forward with all the additional, all the content that are competing for our attention. Really, I think everything else could be infinite, but really our own attention is a very finite resource, and sort of how do we all as an individual to think about our relation with all the content that could be taking up your attention. I think is a very critical thing we have to continue to be very serious about as an individual. Another thing we'd love to share is that I think as the AI arms race and also adoption of AI keep going, and there's we're already seeing a pretty acute demand of increase of power. That sort of a lot of the kind of new power demand, there's seemingly having a trend of shifting towards more clean energy, which could be a good news. I think there was a news came out a couple of days ago where Microsoft was thinking about acquiring an abandoned nuclear plant
3 Mile Island.
Right, to help supporting one of their data and AI center in Ohio or somewhere. So I think that could be a potential positive push. Even though it's consuming a lot of power and emitting a lot of carbon today, but hopefully, this sort of high demand of power will push people to think more on clean energy and adopting sort of more sustainable solution on the power side.
That's cringeworthy for Gen Xers, by the way. Nuclear power is cringy for Gen Xers because of 3 Mile Island.
Well, thank you. You all were great. Let's give them a hand of applause, and we'll go to dinner. Okay.